guys, it's Miss B and I'm here to read some more Charlotte's Web. I'm going to read chapters 19 and 20 today. So I'm super excited because we're getting close to the end, you guys. We just have 4 more chapters left. So let's go over what happened in chapters 17 and 18. So they were at the fair, and let's see, in chapter 17, Charlotte introduces herself to the pig next door that she says is pretty big and could beat Wilbur out. His name was Uncle, and the kids had a blast at the fair. It was super hot. And then in the next chapter, Templeton, brings another word, and his word was humble. And Charlotte is working on something, and she's not in her normal web, so we're not really sure what she's working on. We're going to find that out now. Okay, chapter 19. It's called The Egg Sack. The next morning, when the first light came into the sky and the sparrows stirred in the trees, when the cows rattled their chains and the rooster crowed, and the early automobiles went whispering along the road, Wilbur awoke and looked for Charlotte. He saw her up overhead in a corner near the back of his pen. She was very quiet. What do you guys think she's doing? I want you to make a prediction before I tell you, okay? That means coffee break for Miss B. Okay, let's see. It says, he saw her up overhead in a corner near the back of his pen, and she was very quiet. Her 8 legs were spread wide. She seemed to have shrunk during the night. Next to her, attached to the ceiling, Wilbur saw a curious object. It was some sort of sack or cocoon. It was peach-colored and looked as though it were made of cotton candy. All right, what do you guys think that could be? I want you to make another prediction. Okay, let's see. Are you awake, Charlotte? Wilbur said softly. Yes, came the answer. Can you tell me what is that nifty little thing? Did you make it? I did indeed, replied Charlotte in a weak voice. Is it a plaything? A plaything? I should say not. It is my egg sack, my magnum opus. I don't know what a magnum opus is, said Wilbur. It's Latin. It means great work, explained Charlotte. This egg sack is my great work, the finest thing that I have ever made. Well, what's inside of it? Asked Wilbur. Eggs? 514 of them, she replied. 514? You're kidding, said Wilbur. No, I'm not. I counted them. I got started counting and I kept on just to keep my mind occupied. Well, it's a perfectly beautiful egg sack, said Wilbur, feeling as happy as though he had constructed it himself. Constructed means made. Yeah, it is pretty, replied Charlotte, patting it with her front legs. Anyway, I can guarantee that it is strong. It's made out of the toughest material that I have. It's also waterproof, and the eggs are inside, and they'll be warm and dry. Charlotte, said Wilbur dreamily, are you really going to have 514 children? Well, if nothing happens, yes, she said. Of course, they're not going to show up until next spring. Wilbur noticed that Charlotte's voice sounded very sad. Well, what makes you sound so downhearted? I should think you're terribly happy about this. Oh, well, don't pay attention to me, said Charlotte. I don't have much pep anymore. I guess I feel sad because I won't ever see my children. What do you mean you won't see your children? Of course you will. We all will see them. It's going to be wonderful next spring in the barn cellar with 514 baby spiders running around all over. And the geese will have a new set of goslings, and the sheep will have their new lambs. Maybe, said Charlotte quietly. However, I have a feeling I won't see the results of last night's efforts. I don't feel good at all. I think that I'm languishing, to tell you the truth. What do you guys think that means, languishing? Wilbur didn't understand the word languish, and he hated to bother Charlotte by asking her to explain, but he was so worried he felt he had to ask. Well, what does languishing mean? It means I'm slowing up. I'm feeling my age. I'm not young anymore, Wilbur, but I don't want you to worry about me. This is your big day today. So look at my web. Doesn't it show up well with a dew on it? Charlotte's Web had never looked more beautiful than it did this morning. Each strand held dozens of bright drops of early morning dew, and the light from the east struck it and made it all plain and clear. It was a perfect piece of designing and building. And in another hour or two, a steady stream of people would pass by, admiring it, reading it, looking at Wilbur, marveling at the miracle. As Wilbur was studying his web, a pair of whiskers and a sharp face appeared. Slowly, Templeton dragged himself across the pen and threw himself down in a corner. "I'm back," he said in a husky voice. "What a night!" The rat was swollen to twice his normal size. His stomach was as round as a big jelly jar. Looks like Templeton had a good night at the fair. "What a night," he repeated hoarsely. "What feasting and carousing, a real gorge. I must have eaten the remains of 30 lunches. Never have I seen such leavings, and everything was well ripened and seasoned with the passage of time and the heat of the day. Oh, it was rich, my friends, rich." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself," said Charlotte in disgust. "It would serve you right if you had an acute attack of indigestion." "Don't worry about my stomach," snarled Templeton. "It can handle anything. And by the way, I've got bad news. As I came past that pig next door, the one that calls himself Uncle, I noticed a blue tag in front of his pen. That means that he's already won first prize." "Guess you're licked, Wilbur. You might as well relax. Nobody's going to hang any medal on you. And furthermore, I wouldn't be surprised if Zuckerman changes his mind about you. Wait till he gets a hankering for some fresh pork and smoked ham and crisp bacon. He'll take that knife to you, boy." "Be still, Templeton," said Charlotte. "You're too stuffed and bloated to even know what you're saying. Don't pay any attention to him, Wilbur." Wilbur tried not to think about what the rat had just said, so he changed the subject. "Templeton," said Wilbur, "if you weren't so dopey, you would have noticed that Charlotte has made an egg sac, and she's going to become a mother. For your information, there are 514 eggs in that peachy little sack." "Is that true?" asked the rat, eyeing it suspiciously. "Yes, it's true," said Charlotte. "Congratulations, this has been a night," said Templeton. He closed his eyes, pulled some straw over himself, and dropped himself into a deep sleep. Wilbur and Charlotte were glad to get rid of him for a while. And at 9 o'clock, Mr. Arable's truck rolled into the fairgrounds and came to a stop at Wilbur's pen. Everybody climbed out. "Look!" yelled Fern. "Look at her web! Look at what it says! Look at Charlotte's Web!" The grown-ups and the children joined hands and stood there studying the new sign. "Humble," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Now, isn't that just the word for Wilbur?" Everyone rejoiced. What do you think rejoiced means? So rejoiced means like cheered. Everyone rejoiced to find that the miracle of the web had been repeated. Wilbur gazed up lovingly into their faces. He looked very humble and very grateful. And Fern winked at Charlotte. Lurvy got busy. He poured a bucket of warm slops into the chop, and Wilbur ate his breakfast as Lurvy scratched him gently with a smooth stick. "Wait a minute," cried Avery. "Look at this." He pointed to the blue tag on Uncle's pen. "That pig's already won first place." The Zuckermans and the Arables stared at the tag. Mrs. Zuckerman began to cry. Nobody said a word. And they just stared at the tag. Then they stared at Uncle, and they stared at the tag again, and Lurvy took out a handkerchief and blew his nose very loud. So loud, in fact, that the noise was heard by stable boys over at the horse barn. "Can I have some money?" said Fern. "I need to go out on the midway." "You stay right where you are," said her mom. Tears came to Fern's eyes. "What's everyone crying about?" said Mr. Zuckerman. "Let's get busy. Edith, bring the buttermilk." Mrs. Zuckerman wiped her eyes with her handkerchief. She went to the truck and came back with a gallon jar of buttermilk. "Bath time," said Zuckerman cheerfully. He and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery climbed into the pen, and Avery slowly poured buttermilk on Wilbur's head and back, and as it trickled down his sides and cheeks, Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman rubbed it into his hair and his skin, and passerby stopped to watch. Pretty soon, quite the crowd had gathered. Wilbur grew beautifully white and smooth, and the morning sun shone through his pink ears. "He isn't as big as the pig next door," said one bystander, "but he's cleaner. That's what I like." "So do I," said another man. "He's humble, too," said the woman reading the sign on the web. Everybody who visited the pen had a good word to say about Wilbur. Everyone admired the web, and of course, nobody even noticed Charlotte. Suddenly, a voice was heard on the loudspeaker. "Attention, please," it said. "Will Mr. Homer Zuckerman bring his famous pig to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand? A special award will be made there in 20 minutes. Everyone is invited to attend. Crate your pig, please, Zuckerman, and report to the judge's booth promptly." Okay, I'm going to stop there. That's pretty big news. They don't do stuff like that at the fair. So what do you guys think is happening? I'll give you a second to predict. Okay, let's see. For a moment after the announcement, the Arables and the Zuckermans were unable to speak or move. And then Avery picked up a handful of straw and threw it high in the air and gave a loud yell. The straw fluttered down like confetti into Fern's hair. Mr. Zuckerman hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. Mr. Arable kissed Mrs. Arable. Avery kissed Wilbur. Lurvy shook hands with everybody. Fern hugged her mom. Avery hugged Fern. Mrs. Arable hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. And up overhead, in the shadows of the ceiling, Charlotte laid, crouched unseen, her front legs encircling her egg sack. Here's everybody celebrating because they're excited about whatever award he's going to get. Her heart was not beating as strongly as usual, and Charlotte felt weary and old, but she was sure at last that she had really saved Wilbur's life, and she felt peaceful and content. "We have no time to lose," said Zuckerman. "Lurvy, help me with the crate." "Can I still have some money?" said Fern. "You wait," Mrs. Arable said. "Can't you see everybody's busy?" "Put the empty buttermilk jar into the truck," commanded Mr. Arable, and Avery grabbed the jar and rushed to the truck. "Does my hair look okay?" said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Looks fine," said Mr. Zuckerman as he and Lurvy sat the crate down in front of Wilbur. "You didn't even look at my hair," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "You're all right, Edith," said Mrs. Arable. "Just keep calm." Templeton, asleep in the straw, heard the commotion and woke. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but when he saw the men shoving Wilbur into the crate, he made up his mind to go along. He watched his chance, and when no one was looking, he crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw at the bottom. "All ready, boys," said Zuckerman. "Let's go." He and Mr. Arable and Lurvy and Avery grabbed the crate and boosted over the side of the pen and up in the truck. And Fern jumped aboard and sat on top of the crate. She still had straw in her hair, and she looked very pretty and excited. And Mr. Arable started the motor. Everyone climbed in, and off they drove to the judge's booth in front of the grandstand. As they passed the Ferris wheel, Fern gazed up at it, and she wished she were in the topmost car with Henry Fussy at her side. Okay, we're going to go on to chapter 20. So what do you guys think is going to happen? They're on their way to get this special award. It's called the Hour of Triumph. "Special announcement," said the loudspeaker in a pompous voice. "The management of the fair takes great pleasure in presenting Mr. Homer L. Zuckerman and his famous pig. The truck bearing this extraordinary animal is now approaching the infield. Please kindly stand back and give the truck room to proceed. In a few moments, the pig will be unloaded in the special judging ring in front of the grandstand where a special award will be made. Will the crowd please make way and let the truck pass? Thank you." Wilbur trembled when he heard this speech. He felt happy but dizzy, and the truck crept along slowly in low speed. Crowds of people surrounded it, and Mr. Arable had to drive very carefully in order to not run over anyone. At last, he managed to reach the judge's stand. Avery jumped up, and he lowered the tailgate on the truck. "I am scared to death," whispered Mrs. Zuckerman. "Hundreds of people are looking at us." "Oh, cheer up," replied Mrs. Arable. "This is fun." "Unload your pig, please," said the loudspeaker. "All together now, boys," said Mr. Zuckerman, and several men stepped forward from the crowd to help lift the crate. Avery was the busiest helper of all. "Tuck your shirt in, Avery," said Mrs. Zuckerman, "and tighten your belt. Your pants are coming down." "Can't you see I'm busy?" said Avery in disgust. "Look," cried Fern, pointing. "There's Henry." "Oh, don't shout, Fern," said her mom, "and don't point." "Can I please have money?" asked Fern. "Henry invited me to go on the Ferris wheel again, and I don't think he has any money left, and he ran out of money." Mrs. Arable opened her handbag. Here's 40 cents. Don't get lost and be back at our regular meeting place by the pig pen soon." Fern raced off, ducking and dodging through the crowd in search of Henry. "And the Zuckerman pig is now being taken from his crate," boomed the voice of the loudspeaker. "Stand by for the announcement." Templeton crouched under the straw at the bottom of the crate. "What a lot of nonsense," said the rat. "What a fuss about nothing." Over in the pig pen, silent and alone, Charlotte rested. Her two front legs embraced her egg sack. Charlotte could hear everything that was said on the loudspeaker, and the words gave her courage. This was her hour of triumph. As Wilbur came out of the crate, the crowd clapped and cheered. Mr. Zuckerman took off his cap and bowed. Lurvy pulled his big handkerchief from his pocket, and he wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. Avery knelt in the dirt by Wilbur's side, busily stroking him and showing off. Mrs. Zuckerman and Mrs. Arable stood on the running board of the truck. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the speaker, "we now present Homer L. Zuckerman's distinguished pig. The fame of this unique animal has spread to the far corners of the earth, attracting many valuable tourists to our great state. Many of you will recall the never-forgotten day last summer when the writing appeared mysteriously on the spider's web in Zuckerman's barn, calling the attention of all to the fact that this pig was completely out of the ordinary. And this miracle has never been fully explained, although learned men have visited the Zuckerman pig pen to study and observe this phenomenon. In the last analysis, we simply know that we are dealing with supernatural forces here, and we should all feel proud and grateful. In the words of the spider's web, ladies and gentlemen, this is some pig." Wilbur blushed. He stood perfectly still, and he tried to look at his best. "That magnificent animal," continued the loudspeaker, "is terrific. Look at him, ladies and gents. Note the smoothness and whiteness of the coat. Observe his spotless skin and the healthy pink glow of his ears and his snout." "It's the buttermilk," said Mrs. Arable to Mrs. Zuckerman. "And note the general radiance of this animal. And remember one day when the word radiant appeared clearly on the web? Where came this mysterious writing? Not from the spider, we can rest assured of that. Spiders are clever at weaving their webs, but needless to say, spiders cannot write." "Oh, they can, can't they?" murmured Charlotte to herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," continued the loudspeaker, "I must not take any more of your valuable time. On behalf of the governors of the fair, I have the honor of awarding a special prize of $25 to Mr. Zuckerman, together with a handsome bronze medal suitably engraved in token of our appreciation of the part played by the pig. This radiant, terrific, humble pig is attracting so many visitors to our great county fair." Wilbur had been feeling dizzier and dizzier through this long, complimentary speech, and when he heard the crowd begin to cheer, he suddenly fainted away. His legs collapsed, his mind went blank, and he fell to the ground unconscious. "What's wrong?" said the loudspeaker. "What's going on, Zuckerman? What's the trouble with that pig?" Avery was kneeling by Wilbur's head, stroking him. Mr. Zuckerman was dancing about, fanning him with his cap. "Oh, he's all right," said Zuckerman. "He gets these spells sometimes. He's modest and just cannot stand praise." "Well, we can't give a prize to a dead pig," said the loudspeaker. "It's never been done." "He isn't dead," said Zuckerman. "He's fainted. He gets embarrassed easily. Run for some water, Lurvy." Lurvy sprang from the judge's ring and disappeared, and Templeton poked his head from the straw. He noticed the end of Wilbur's tail was within reach. He grinned. "I'll tend to this," he chuckled. He took Wilbur's tail in his mouth and bit it just as hard as he could. The pain revived Wilbur. In a flash, he was back on his feet. "Ow!" he screamed. "Hooray!" yelled the crowd. "He's up! Good work, Zuckerman. That is some pig." Everyone was delighted, and Mr. Zuckerman was the most pleased of all, and he sighed with relief. Nobody had seen Templeton. That rat had done his work well. Now one of the judges climbed into the ring with the prizes. He handed Zuckerman 2 $10 bills and a $5 bill, and then he tied the medal around Wilbur's neck. He shook hands with Mr. Zuckerman while Wilbur blushed. Avery put out his hand and shook the judge's hands too. This crowd cheered, and a photographer took Wilbur's picture. A great feeling of happiness swept over the Zuckermans and the Arables. This was the greatest moment in Mr. Zuckerman's life. It is deeply satisfying to win a prize in front of a lot of people. As Wilbur was being shoved back into his crate, Lurvy came charging the crowd carrying a pail of wet water. His eyes had a wild look. Without hesitating a second, he dashed the water at Wilbur. In his excitement, he missed his aim, and the water splashed all over Mr. Zuckerman and Avery. That's Wilbur getting his picture taken. "For goodness sakes," said Mr. Zuckerman, who was really drenched. "What ails you, Lurvy? Can't you see the pig's fine?" "Oh, well, you asked for the water," said Lurvy meekly. Can you guys picture that in your head? You know, Wilbur's fine now, but Lurvy missed that. Wilbur's getting in the crate, and Lurvy comes running over all crazy and spills a big bucket of water on Mr. Zuckerman and Avery. It's pretty funny. I didn't ask for a shower bath, said Mr. Zuckerman, and the crowd roared with laughter. Finally, Mr. Zuckerman had to laugh too, and of course Avery was just tickled to find himself so wet. And he immediately started to act like a clown. He pretended he was taking a shower bath. And he made faces, danced around, and rubbed imaginary soap in his armpits. And he dried himself with an imaginary tail. Oh, Avery, stop it, said his mom. Stop showing off. But the crowd loved it. Avery heard nothing but applause. He would like to be a clown in a ring with everybody watching in front of a grandstand. And when he discovered there was still a little water left in the pail, he raised it high in the air and dumped it on himself and made faces. The children in the grandstand screamed with appreciation. At last, things calmed down. Wilbur was loaded into the truck, and Avery was led from the ring by his mom, and I placed on the seat of the truck to dry off. The truck, driven by Mr. Arable, crawled slowly back to the pig pen. Avery's wet trousers made a big wet spot in the seat. Okay, so that's it for that chapter. And the next time I take a video, it will be the last 2 chapters of Charlotte's Web. So right now, I want you to predict how Charlotte's Web is going to end. We have Charlotte, and she is, not doing so well, and she has her eggs at the barn. So I want you to think, is she going to leave the fair barn and go back to her normal barn? Do you think she's going to stay there? And I also want you to think, is she going to have all of her babies? And then I want you to think about Wilbur and his fate. Do you think Charlotte truly has saved him and they're going to keep the pig around? We'll have to find out next time. Bye, guys.